Hey everyone, Sycra here, and I decided to redo some of my older videos with some updated knowledge and show you some tips and tricks to handle common problems that I see. So today I'm going to be tackling the eyes, and the first thing I'm going to do is change the background color of this to more of a gray so it's less of a bother on my eyes, and that's fine. Okay, so previously I had shown you this method of drawing eyes where I started with an eye socket, right? I don't know if you've seen this. If you haven't seen this, this is how I showed. I showed you start with an eye socket and then you put in a circle for the eyeball. And it's actually a ball shape. Don't think of it as a circle. Think of it as a sphere. And then you create the lids for the eyes, the upper lid, and then the lower lid, and then the iris and the pupil. And then you can add some folds and creases. And that's a pretty good way. But in this updated version, what I would say is, first of all, I've seen too many tutorials on how to draw eyes, and they tend to focus on this kind of very close-up view. To the point of like even drawing a gigantic eye. And how often do people really draw these huge eyes, right, that cover the entire page? Well, not often. So I still see recurring mistakes. And so what I would recommend is when you're starting to draw eyes, always start with, or a good idea is to start with the head shape. And that's the first thing. Start with a head shape. And then the eyes are located halfway down from the top of the head to the bottom of the chin. It's halfway. And then what I do is the same thing. I block in the eye sockets. Now, the shape I use is sort of like a rough, I suppose, triangular shape. But I might just create this shape as well. So this triangle here, there's a triangle here. This is the space it's just above your bridge of your nose. So your nose would go down here. And from the eyes to the bottom of the chin, if you go halfway, that's where your nose is. So it's this space that I'm creating. Okay? And at this space, where you've got this indent, and then you have the bridge of the nose here, right? At this, that's where the top of the eye usually is. It's where it's aligned to. So you got the top of the eye here, and then you have one eye space in between each eye. So by having the sockets in first, it's going to create an eye that's in proportion to the rest of the head. And then usually you have half an eye, so you take half this distance and you put it on the side, and that gives you where the side of your head would be. So this is just drawing to make sure things are in proportion. Now another thing that this socket thing does is it makes it easier to get things so your eyes are, in a front view anyway, they're symmetrical, they're, you know, the same size. Starting rough, it makes it easier to block in a rough shape, and then you can put in the eyebrows and whatever. But you get a rough shape in, and then you get the other rough shape in, and then you detail them at the same time. So you create, again, to redo it, get a head shape, halfway, get the eye sockets in, and then, see, very rough, get the eyeball shape in, very rough, and then the top of the eye, which aligns with this section where the bridge of the nose starts, comes down, and then you go like this corner, and then I usually find that corner, this corner, find that corner, and that's better than if you were to just do this, which is start with the eyes and then get one eye very detailed, and maybe you like it, maybe it's like, yeah, that's a cool eye, and then you have to deal with the other side, and you might get a bit nervous, like, how do I make the other side, you know, look as good as this side? So I mean, with practice you can do it, but without practice it gets a bit hard. So that's the first thing is, you know, you start rough and you always get the eye sockets. Now the other reason to get the eye sockets in is if you don't have the eye sockets here, what happens is often people will draw the eyes, so let's say we have a head shape, right? They'll draw the eyes so they're too far out near the side or maybe too close to the center, and it's like, maybe, especially with anime eyes and things like this, they're not fitting in a skull, and this is not a good idea. So sometimes you'll see things like this. So what's wrong with this image? Well, what we're saying is that this eye is really too far to this side of the face, and so if we had some eye sockets in here to begin with, and then you build the eye inside, it's much easier to get correct placement. The other thing it does is it makes your eyes not too big. So this is another big problem, is people tend to draw eyes way too big, especially with guys. This happens a lot. Not with guys, like guys tend to draw eyes too big and girls don't. No, girls also draw eyes way too big. But when you're drawing men, their eyes tend to be pretty big. And let's say we're doing even a face this big, right? We get the eye sockets. And now the eye sockets don't have to be too massive either. Sometimes the eyes are just this, like they're this big. And it's just a case of what we're really squashing isn't the horizontal, because horizontally there's still one eye width across, and then you have another eye width, and then you have another eye width, and then you have half and half. And that's still the same. It's just the vertical distance is pretty squished, and too often you'll get things that are a bit too big like that. So this is something else you want to keep in mind, is that eyes aren't always as tall as you think they are. And the other thing is that the irises, especially on these more squinty eyes, I suppose, they're not, or they're pretty big, so the whites of the eyes aren't as visible as you might think, and that's another big problem. And I guess it's from things like cartoons where you have big whites of the eyes and a little pupil, and sometimes you just don't give enough room for the iris. So that's the first thing, is the eye sockets and how important they are and where eyes go in a face. Now the other thing has to do more with the painting side, and that is the values and also the location of things like eyebrows. So let's say we're drawing a guy, right? So I'm going to give him some eyebrows, and you'll notice the way I'm doing it is not like, I'm not drawing each individual brow like this. What I did is I blocked in a basic shape for where I want the eyebrow, and then I just filled it. Now eyebrows have a certain rhythm to the hairs, and it goes like this. You start with hairs that, so let's say this is the eyebrow and the nose is here, right? Okay, and you have the eye here. Okay, so you start with, oh, and this is something else really important. In my drawings, I tend to add this line. It's not important that you add it, but it's important that you have this rhythm. At the end of the eye, it's sort of this part, right? So we're drawing the eye. You have, this is the tear duct right here, okay? And then it comes around, and you have the upper eyelid. Now the upper eyelid tends to join, like it creates this rhythm that points back to the eyebrow. And so you get a shape. So back to the shape of the hairs. Well, the hairs in this point, they tend to be vertical more, and then they start to curve this way, like fanning out. And then as they get to this point, they start to change and go more this way. So you have this direction, then this direction, then this direction. And these two can be combined because this is one thing. And sometimes what happens is, especially with women who pluck their eyebrows, they might get rid of this part. The other thing is that this tends to be a bit more soft, this transition here. But again, if you pluck the eyebrows, that can become a very hard transition. So this is something to keep in mind with eyebrows, is this rhythm. You know, it goes around, it comes back down, and then you build the eye here. So if we have this guy and we have the eyebrows in, what's going to happen is there's going to be a shadow that forms, and it's almost always present unless the eyebrows are raised, because you're blocking some light, and so you get a bit of a shadow, and it creates an eye that is sort of in shadow, like so. And you get a bit of shadow even on the lower lid, and then you have the nose, and you have the mouth. Right? But this eye is really not as defined as what you usually see in beginners' works. It's much more common to see a very, I guess, cartoony eye, like this, with a big dot in the middle, and like that, and maybe a big iris, and then some eyelashes. Now the other thing is, notice the eyelashes, they're really not there too much. And the way I do handle eyelashes, because maybe, yeah, you know, you see that huge eye and it's taking up the whole page, then yeah, sure, you get eyelashes, and just for the sake of being thorough, I'll show you my trick to eyelashes when they're that big, is to have a rhythm like this, almost like a U shape, like this, but you do this. You're doing that U shape and you're following the contour of the eye. And that's sort of how I get eyelashes to look eyelashy. Because they tend to do this, like the individual hairs will sort of stick together to other individual hairs and create more patterns like this. And mascara does this too. It clumps the eyelashes together. So anyway, it's just a trick. But in the more, I guess, distant view of the face, you don't see the eyelashes that much. And the way I do it is I just, again, like the eyebrows, because even though the eyebrows have this, you know, they have this directional, this goes this way, then it goes this way, then it goes that way, I tend to just block it in as one tone. And I do this the same with eyelashes, but I only tend to really darken in the upper lash. Now, the darker you make this upper lash, the more it's going to look like the person's wearing mascara. Also, the thicker you make it. So if you really want them to look like they have makeup on, you should pile this on. Make this really thick, and also thicken this area just underneath. Now, it doesn't go the whole way. You don't want to do this. See? I mean, you can have makeup like this. Some girls have makeup like this, and I guess some guys too, if they're into that. I think it's more appealing to just darken this end point of the lower lash. But let's say you wanted to create a girl's eye and she's not wearing that much makeup. Well, what I do is I just lightly create horizontal strokes, and I'm getting a bit thicker towards this part, and then I create a bit of a stroke here, and then I just lose the edge here. Like this whole middle part, it's gone. Just, you don't need that edge. And then I sort of pick it up again at the tear duct, and then the next thing I do is I build the what do you call this? The eyelid crease, and then that's pretty much it. So that's how I build an eye without makeup. It's just with these horizontal strokes. You'll notice there's not much of this going on, and you can do that at the end. You know, you could add a few lines to indicate some eyelashes, but it's much softer than you would think. And then what I do is I create, again, more softness in the iris. And the way you create softness with an iris, and this is another thing, is there's a lot of softness in an eye. It may sound strange. What I'm talking about when I say softness is edges. There's a lot of soft edges. So how do you get soft edges? Like, let's say I was using a pen, right? Which I do a lot. And so let's just have this at very high opacity. How do I create softness? Well, what I do is I do these sort of stroking lines like this. So I'm sort of doubling up the line, and I do the same thing for the eyelashes. I create these kind of doubled up lines. And you may see this if you're familiar with manga. This is something common that they'll do too. They sort of, not all of them, but some manga artists will create an eye shape like so, and then they just, using horizontal strokes, you're not going up and down, you're just going horizontal, following the form, you create this kind of softer line. It looks more soft, and it's a way of still maintaining your opacity, not changing that, but getting the illusion of more softness in there. So I do that with the eye, create some softness, and then what I do as well is I add some shadow onto the entire eyeball from the eyelash. And it's from the entire upper lid. It's casting shadow. And then what you can do is, okay, so I added some shadow here, right? Let me zoom in on this more. Okay, so I added some lashes and then I added some shadow. And again, look at the strokes I'm using. I'm using horizontal strokes. Why am I using horizontal strokes? Because when you use horizontal strokes that go across the form, it doesn't really bother you. It doesn't stand out. But let's start like this. Let's draw a cylinder, right? Okay. Now, if I do strokes up and down like this, it's a lot more subtle than if I do strokes going across the form. Now, I'm not saying this is what you should do in terms of like, oh, don't go across the form, because in fact, you want to do this when you shade. This is very good for shading forms, when you want the form to read. But if you just want to create tone and you're drawing, then you can just go across the form like that, and it'll be tone that's a bit more subtle. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to darken the area in the shadow of the iris. So you see how that works? By darkening this area that's in the shadow, what happens is that your eye is going to see this as being in the shadow. And then when I draw the pupil, I'm going to do the same thing. In the light side, I'm going to shade it, but in the shadow, I'm going to shade it more. So you see what happens now? It looks like the pupil, this too, is in the shadow. And then you can add a highlight and all the fancy stuff here. So I'll show you how to make things all nice and the jewel-like appearance of an eye. I'll just show you how to do that real quick. So if you've seen my videos before, you may have seen me cover this, but basically if you want to make something look very jewel-like, what you do is, let's say this is the iris, right? And you have the pupil, and let's just fit this in an eye anyway. Okay, so you're gonna have a shadow that's cast on the eye from the eyelid, right? Okay, so let's just block that in. So we have a shadow. We're not gonna put any highlight here. Now, if we do have a highlight, it'll usually show up here, though you can sometimes add the highlight here. It's a bit more, like, it's harder to buy, so I tend not to, but I'm just gonna add a highlight here. Now, the highlight's here, right? So that means the light is coming from this side. So what does that mean? Well, it means this whole thing, this eyeball, don't forget, it's a ball, right? So if you have a ball and you have a light here, for instance, and it's shining down, what happens is half of this ball, or maybe not half, but a portion of this ball is going to be in light and a portion is going to be in shadow. Now the shadow, it's going to be on this side because the light is shooting down. Usually the light is fairly parallel, especially if you're dealing with the sun, and so it hits the ball, hits the ball, hits the ball, hits the ball, and then it hits this part of the ground, right? Hits this part of the ground, but it doesn't hit all this part. So this is where you get the ball shadow. I'm not going to go too detailed into this right now. But the other thing, especially if you've seen my Foundations of Light and Shadow video series, this is going to be like just a review for you. Light's coming here, so perpendicular. You cut this in half and you'll get a shadow like so. And the same is true for the eyeball, because it's just a ball with an iris, with a pupil. But first and foremost, it is a ball, you know. The fact that it's in a head doesn't change that, the fact that it's a ball, right? So you have this, and you have this shadow. So this, if the highlight's here, usually this area is going to be a bit in shadow, because it's still a ball. Okay, so you've got this, and you have this. Now, the other thing that happens is near the highlight, it usually darkens up. So we're going to darken this part anyway of the iris, just because this is in shadow. And then I'm also going to darken around the highlight. That's the part that's going to be the darkest. And what's happening is the light is hitting this surface of the lens. So let's say we're going to look at this eye in a bit of a perspective. So, okay, so this is the iris, okay, here. And here's the pupil, right? And then your eye has a clear lens on top. And so when light comes down, let's say from this angle, right? What's going to happen is the light ray is going to come and it's going to hit this part first. And so it's going to create a highlight of, which is just a reflection. The highlight is just a reflection of the light source. It's reflecting this light source right here. But then some of this light, because it's clear, it's transparent, it's going to go through this lens and it's going to hit on this portion of the iris. So what's going to happen is you get a highlight on the opposite side of the iris, and you have a highlight on the lens, and then on the opposite side of the iris it gets lighter, because that's where the light tends to go through. So the same thing is going to happen here. We have a highlight here, right? I'm going to darken in the pupil. We have a highlight. And then this part of the iris is going to be light as well. But it's not going to be as light as this highlight, because this is a reflection of our light source, like the sun. And so what's going to happen is I tend to do one tone over the entire iris, and then I darken the areas that aren't across from the highlight. So this then appears a lot brighter, right? So now this part is the brightest, this small highlight, and it is small. It usually is fairly small, or it looks more shiny if it's small. And then you have some shadow around the highlight, and then it gets lighter on the opposite surface, and this looks very, very jewel-like, right? And if you're drawing gems or anything like that, it's the same principle. Like, let's say light's coming from here, and we got this gem. Well, you get your highlight here, this part's dark, and right across from the highlight it gets a bit lighter. And it's the same idea. It's the exact same idea, and I could just use a white to punch these highlights up so it looks like really cool and sparkly. And there you go. Right? So now this looks very shiny. Shiny and cool. Okay, so that's how to make things look shiny. Okay, now I'm going to go over some common problems that I see when drawing eyes. So one of the first problems is, and you'll notice when I draw eyes, I always start with the ball and then I create this shape. Now, first let me explain this shape. So what it really is it's a few curves. I start with the eyeball, right? And then I start with one curve in the corner of the eye, and then a curve describing the top of the eye, and then another curve going down. So we have 1, 2, 3, and sometimes I combine 2 and 3 into one, and then you get 4 and 5, and that's the eye shape. And these 5, or sometimes again I'll combine these two. So I could go 1, 2, 3. That's 1, 2, 3. Or I could go 1, 2, 3, 4. Or I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So any of these create an eye shape. Now, you can change any of these things. Like, okay, so this one starts here and it goes here. This is 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2. And so this is the inside corner where the tear duct is. And this is the outside corner. Let's combine those, or connect those. Okay, so you get an angle like that. You could have it like that, or you could have it very straight, where you have the inside corner, and it's exactly lined up with the outside corner, something like that. Or you could have it the other way, where you have the inside corner and it's actually higher than the outside corner. And then you get an eye that's more this shape. So one of the common problems I see, once I get the eye shape in, or what I see, is that you often see eyes that are like this, which are too small. Now, in certain styles, you can get away with this. So I mentioned cartooning. There's a lot of manga styles that do this, and they get away with this. But that's because the person knows what they're doing. If you're dealing with realism, the iris is actually pretty big. And what happens is you tend to not see white around the whole eye. If anything, you tend to only see white in two spots. On this side and on this side. This is where you see the white. Sometimes you'll see white on the bottom as well. Like if the person's looking up or something, you'll see white on the bottom. But it's very rare that you'll see white all the way around. Now, when do you see white all the way around? Well, there are some cases. One is when you're dealing with children. Their eyes are a bit more open, and so you'll see more cases like this, where you have white all around the edge of the eye. And you'll see here I did again 1, 2, 3. So 3 curves. 1, 2, and then this one connecting all the way to the tear duct. You'll see white all around. The other case is if you're very surprised and your eyelid really opens up, you might see the entire ball of that iris. And yeah, so this is very shocked, and often the pupil gets much smaller when you're surprised. Whoa! And the eyebrow raises. So that's another time you might have a situation where you do see white. And even in this case, I mean, it's not all that, maybe it's just a bit of white, but the principle here that's important is the iris tends to be very big. Now, this is also true in a lot of manga styles that I see, and especially the ones I find very appealing. You'll get the eye shape, and the eye shape is actually very similar in the amount of what do you call these? The curves, right? You still have 1, 2, 3, and again, there's a ton of manga eyes, but let's say just a very common one is this shape, and then you really darken the eyelash, the upper eyelash, and again, I'm using horizontal strokes. I'm not doing this, not doing that. I'm not making a fuzzy line around the eyes, and I think this might have even been one of the things I did in my very first How to Draw Eyes tutorial, is that I did go ahead and make more of a line, and it creates this hairy look, you know, to the eye. It looks kind of hairy. Then what I'm going to do is darken this side of this lash, and that's just suggesting the lashes, because the lashes, they do go across the whole eye, but they're thicker at the outside corner, and same for the lash here. It's thicker around here, and so you get this type of thing. Now, so I do that, and then you create a much larger iris. And so again, the white of the eye is here and here, but you see it's really not taking up that much space. And then what happens is in the iris you might get a lot of you know, a larger pupil, or sometimes a smaller one, and a bunch of fancy highlights everywhere. It tends to be pretty common. With manga eyes, you can really go crazy on the inside, it seems. But yeah, so you get this kind of thing. And again, depending on where the light is, that's where the highlight is. So let's say this surprised eye, right? They're surprised, but whatever's surprising them is actually lit from below, coming from below. So then you'd get the highlight, let's say below here, and maybe this part lightens up across from the highlight. So keep that in mind. Now, something else I want to cover is the eyelid. Eyelid. This is a big thing that is often neglected, especially in an eye that's close up. So yes, you have this eye shape, but you also, remember, you have a tear duct, right? And then you have an upper lid and a lower lid. Now, often the upper lid doesn't show up because it's hidden by eyelashes and because of perspective. We tend not to see the upper lid, the shelf of the upper lid, but we do see the shelf of the lower lid. And the shelf of the lower lid connects to the tear duct, right? So when you have eyelashes, they also come from this, they're attached to the lower lid and the upper lid. That's where they attach. So you have an eye and it looks like this, right? And you've got this pupil. And another thing I mentioned, I talked about how the eye is often, you only get the whites on the sides, right? Well, with the pupil, what tends to happen, and I haven't included it here, but I'm just going to change the shape of the eye, is that the eyelid tends to go down so that the pupil touches the upper lid. This isn't always the case, but it's often the case. And so just if you're drawing somebody, keep this in mind, or keep a lookout for this, because usually this is the case. The upper pupil is touching the upper lid. So what you get is this shape of, you have the iris and you have the pupil, and then you have a bit of space for the lower lid, and then you have the tear duct. Now, okay, that's fine. And it tends to make sense when you're really zoomed in. But what's important is that if you're zoomed way out, like let's say that far, it's also visible. So even when you're doing a small eye, the way it shows up is it looks more like this, where you have the eye. I'm going to draw it a bit bigger so it's visible to all you people, but it's a bit thicker. You have a bit of a thickness, and then you have it so this iris isn't touching the bottom of that thickness. It's not doing, let's use a different color. It's not doing this, right? It's not doing this. It does this, and it stops, and it does this because you have this lower lid right here and right here. Now, this is a very subtle thing, but I think it is something that is worth remembering, because when you include all these subtle details, it just makes your eyes look much better. And so keep that in mind. Keep the eye, the tear duct and the eyelids in your mind. Now, if you look at the eye from a different angle, let's say more of a side view, what happens is these tear ducts take up much more of a prominence. So let's say the eye shape is like this. You'll actually see the tear duct featured much more. And again, the lashes come or attached to that tear duct. And so it is something to keep in mind. Now, the other thing is the eyelid. And there's a crease here often. Not always, but often. There is a crease on the eyelid. And how this crease is tends to determine the ethnicity of the person. So, for instance, with more Caucasian eyes and really even African eyes, Indian eyes, they tend to have more of a visible crease here, and that's sort of a characteristic. Sometimes you'll have larger eyelids. Sometimes you'll have eyelids that have multiple folds, like this, where you see the eyelid going over and it creases, and then you have the eye socket here. This line is describing where the eye socket is, and then you would have the eyebrow here. But you could also have a pad of fat that is here, and so what'll happen is the crease will be different. It'll be more like this, or it could go into this bony ridge here. And so this area is part of the upper, I don't know how to call it, but you have the lid, and this is the upper eye socket part, and this is the brow. So sometimes it goes down like this. Now, with certain Asian eyes, it goes more like this, where you have the eye, and it comes down like this, but you actually don't see the crease, this second crease here, which is a lot of people, especially in places like Korea, will get double eyelid surgery, where they'll be surgically altered to get this crease. But I actually think it looks really cool without the crease, so I don't know, to me it's like, why would you do that? Your eyes look so cool. And so what happens is you get a darker area in the tear duct, and again, I'm going to fade off here, and this is important. It's important not to always outline every little detail of the eye, and I tend to outline maybe the top, this area near the tear duct, and then the top, and then maybe this side, but here I often just lose the edge right here, and it makes the eye look more round, and it also suggests that lower lid. So you'll get an eye, in this case, that's more like this, and then what's happening is the skin is folding under like this, and this area here covers it so that you don't get a crease here. You might get a crease here, peeking up here at this point, and then you get the eye showing. And with these type of eyes, what tends to happen is also the eyelid gets pushed, it pushes the eyelashes down a bit more. And you can get this with different eyes as well. Like, it's not just Asian eyes where the eyelashes point down. Sometimes the eyelashes point up, they curl up. In my case, they curl up, but they can also go down like this. So in this case, you get that. But for me, I tend to just avoid the eyelashes too much and shade in this eye. And so that's another type of eye you can do. And so it's something to look for as well, is this upper lid, and is there a crease at this fold or not. And then the other thing is the lower lid. And the lower lid, I'm not just talking about this rim of the lower lid, but this portion as well. Sometimes this is shown, and what you want to do is, if you outline this, if you put this in, either suggest it very mildly, or I just tend to add a very light tone to suggest this. I don't go crazy. I don't add like all these harsh lines like that, because what it does is it makes your person look very tired or very old. Okay, now I want to talk about eyes in side view. So we've got the front view down. You get your ball, you put in your shape of your eye. And I'm sorry I keep drawing this eye shape. I tend to favor a certain eye shape, and it tends to be very pointy like this. And so when I draw eyes, they often are more like this shape. But anyway, there are many different kinds of eyes, and let's do something more like this. Okay, so there's a different eye. So we've got the front. Now what happens in the side? Well, let's start by getting the 3/4. So we have, let's say there's the eyelid here, right? And we have a bit of a darkening at the top to suggest, again using horizontal strokes, to suggest this upper lid, right? Now, let's turn this. The tear duct is important. So let's turn this. And what's going to happen is, first of all, the width is going to be reduced as we turn this. So we're going to get more of this shape. So this eye, the height's the same. And this from here to here is the same. But the width's going to be reduced. And we're going to see more of this if we're turning it, I don't know, towards this direction. We're going to see more of the tear duct. Probably see inside that eye a little bit. And now the iris itself, it's not a circle anymore. It's going to take more of an elliptical shape. And then you get the pupil. Now, what happens in the front view is, yes, the pupil's closer to the top of the eye, and you can also offset this. It won't look too wrong if you offset the pupil. And the reason why is, going back to that thing of, yeah, we have the big eyeball, right? Well, you have this lens, this clear lens covering the iris. This part's the iris, and the iris is actually on the surface of the eye. The lens is over, so you'll see there's a bump. Now that might be a bit exaggerated, but there is a bump here. And then the pupil is not a thing, it's just a hole. It's a hole, and the iris is a muscle, and it contracts or expands to make this bigger or smaller. I think this is called the aperture in a camera. But anyway, what happens is this clear lens is filled with liquid. And so when the light comes, let's say this is the light, comes and it hits and you get that highlight, right? When it goes through, what happens is, you've probably seen this with a bathtub, right? So let's say you've got, or even no, we don't need a bathtub. Let's just do a cup. You got a cup, right? Or a glass, and it's full of liquid, or not full, it's, I don't know, half full. And you've got a straw. What you've probably seen is, when the straw hits the surface, it refracts. It looks like it's bending, and that's called refraction. And that's because the light is coming in at an angle, and it's revealing all this stuff, but then when it hits the water, it comes in at it bounces back to your eye at a different angle. So the same thing can happen with pupils, and so they can sometimes be offset, you know? So it tends to not look too wrong if, for instance, a pupil is like this, and the iris is like that. Now, this is just something I've noticed. It might not be entirely true, but I've done this and it never really looks wrong. It always looks fine to offset the pupil. And the other thing is, as the eye turns to the side and in a 3/4 view, place the pupil further back towards this side, leaving more space on this side. Okay? So it becomes more elliptical. And then as you turn to a full side view, again, the height is going to be the same, right? Height's going to be the same. But what you'll see is a little bit of the curve of this eye, because again, it's an eyeball. Now from the front, you might not see too much, but from the side you will. You'll see the curve to the eye, and you might also see a bit of that curve to the lens. And then you'll get the eyelids covering it, right? But the eyelids are going to do this thing. They're going to create more of a V shape, or this shape. And this varies. This shape varies. So sometimes it's more like this. Sometimes it's more like this. Really depends. And because the eyelashes come forward, I'm going to darken in the eyelashes. Because the eyelashes come forward, they're actually going to be more visible in the side view coming out like this than they are in the front view going up like that. Because often the eyelashes are coming towards us, right? And so it's a terrible arrow. But they're going to be, usually they are visible on the side view coming forward like that. And then you have just a line going down for this iris. It just becomes this type of very squished thing. So here it's more like that, and here it's more of a round shape from the front view. It's like round. And then as you go to the side, and goes like that. And notice the pupil, it's actually getting closer to this side. And then you have the highlights. So you get something that looks more like this from a side view. And again, I use the horizontal strokes for the eyelashes. And you can also, especially when I draw girls, I'll tend to do, I'm overdoing the lens of the eye, so just gonna make that a bit more subtle. But I tend to do things like this, where I'll make the lashes go forward and then curl up. And for me, I'm a huge fan of lashes, so I tend to go a bit crazy with them. And the same is often true if you see manga drawings. They might go a bit super crazy with the lashes, something like this. Okay, and then, so we have that, and then we also still have this eyebrow crease, or eyelid crease, sorry. And the way you make something look creased, like, see how I can make this look like it's folding in, is I'm not outlining everything equally. I'm not doing this, because making a strong line like this, it's going to kill that appearance of a crease. But making it so you have this upper lid, or upper lash, and then I start lighter and I create darker areas on this line, it's going to make it look like this is actually folding in. It's more creased. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, in the side view, this part has a curve to it as well. So the eyeball has a curve, and the eyelid covering the eyeball has a curve as well. And it's following that eyeball because it's covering that eyeball, but it's got a thickness to it. The other thing is, you'll probably see the tear duct on the side here. So you get more of a shape like this. And something that often gets done poorly is this, the side of the, like, where do I put the nose, right? You got a face here, where do I put the nose? Well, if you remember from the front view, you have the bridge of the nose, and it's got this turn where it turns down, then you have this nose shape. And this happens at this part where the top of the eyelid is, right? That's where that turn happens. And so you can do the same for the side view. You have this turn and the nose begins coming down at this angle right here. So it sort of lines up, right? And then this one's actually a bit off, but something like that, I would say it's a bit more correct, right? So this should give it to you where that curve is. And the same is true for the manga face. So let me just quickly do a more anime style. And the reason I'm doing styles is because I really want to get it in your head that these things that I'm saying, they carry over. It's not just one style. It's not about, oh, well, I don't care about fundamentals, I don't care about this because I'm doing an anime style, so this doesn't matter. No, it still matters. So let's say this is more of a side view of an anime character. And you have this, see? This is where it changes direction. It's going this way, then it goes this way, and then you have the upper lid. Well, this is where the top of the eye is going to be. It's roughly here. And we can get this. And then the eyebrow comes forward and it goes up, and then it connects again. There's this rhythm. See? This that I often put in my drawings. It's sort of like a signature of mine, is to have this. Because no one else was doing it and I thought it was cool. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do that. So that's why. And so you'll get something looking like this. And sometimes in manga, the eyelashes poke out. And this can happen in real life too. The eyelashes poke further than this part of the face. So you get something looking like that. Maybe give it a bit more, a smaller mouth. But yeah, so that's what's happening in the side view. Okay, the last thing I want to cover in the drawing portion of this video is expressions. So I'm going to start with a head as a base, little nose and a mouth. It's got a pointy chin, but let's just round off the chin for those people who hate pointy chins. See, it's very square now. And some ears and some eye sockets. So this is more of a child face. But okay, so we have this. This is our basic framework. Now I'm gonna create a new layer, and I'm gonna lower the opacity of this layer. Lower the opacity just a bit, something like that, and I'll create a new layer. So now I'm gonna draw the actual eye. So okay, let's go through some expressions. Well, the mouth is sort of giving away the expression, so let's hide the mouth. So he has no mouth, so we can just focus on the eyes. Now, what happens in happy face? Well, it depends. There's two things that can happen that are kind of weird. Sometimes what happens is everything gets very squeezed, and you get this kind of cute face where the eyes are kind of down, like closed. And in manga they do have a curve to it. Remember, the eye is curved on this ball, right? So what happens, especially considering perspective, is it won't just be like this, although that is one way of simplifying it. And the eyebrows go down. Now, how do you do expressions? Well, I've mentioned this before. The way I do them anyways, grab a mirror and just draw it, and it's like, okay, so when I'm happy, what happens is the eyes sort of squeeze shut, and then you get some creases on the lower lid, and the top of the eyebrows tend to be very rounded. So there's this way where it's like more rounded. Now, I think the eyebrows are probably the best. They're the best in terms of capturing an emotion. Because you could get a face, right? And let's just do a smiley face. Okay. So there. It's got a very neutral expression. Very neutral. Okay. See? Now he's got one expression. Just the eyebrows. Now he's got another expression. Now he's got more of an ambiguous expression. Now he's got a sad expression. Now he's got a confused expression. And these subtle expressions, like the confusion and stuff, it comes from creating asymmetry. Like, okay, if I do this, he's bored, right? Just straight across. If I do this, he's a bit worried. But if I take one of the worried away and I create an up expression, it's like, oh, okay, he's a bit confused. Create an angry expression, then I go up. He's like, huh? What are you talking about? And 2, it's angry. So if you vary the eyebrows, you get a whole range of very complex emotions, and I think that is very cool. But anyway, back to our current one. Okay, so happy, got it? Okay, so now let's just open one eye. And I messed up because got to draw in the circle of the eye. Because, okay, so the eye when it closes, it's still halfway. Like, it's closed halfway, so you have a bit on the top and a bit on the bottom. Okay, so now let's do another expression on this side of the eye. And he's like, kind of peeking, right? And then if you did both like this, still pretty happy, pretty okay. And often I'll block in the whole eye, including the iris, as black. And the reason I do this is because it's just easier to get the shape of the eye. So, for instance, I told you I work on both eyes like together, right? So you get a face, split it in two, whatever. Get the eye sockets, So I always go 1, 2, right? Doesn't matter. I might go this one first and then that one. Doesn't matter about that, but just... Okay, and then I get the eye here, the eye shape. Now, okay, so here's the tricky part, is where's the pupil? And by blocking it all in black, what I can do is I can start, let's say here, and start here, and then see, like, does that work? Oh, that's a bit off. And then I'm sort of, like, just going to the outside until it looks right. And I can do that for this one too, and sort of build outwards. And this just makes it much easier for me to create eyes. And it's a bit of a trick that I use, is to do this. And the other thing is, if you want expressions, feel free to just get a simple dude, a happy face dude, and just, you know, experiment with those, because it still carries over. And this face looks very strange. It's very tired. Ugh. I'm so tired. These dark rings around his eyes. Looks very sad, very worried. But yeah, I use the black for this to sort of build it. And then let's say I wanted to color it. Well, because I work digitally for coloring, you can always just erase the black area and just put in a pupil then. And it's pretty easy to get the expressions, to maintain all that. So there, you've got another expression. Now, what else can we do? Well, oh, you want the person to be angry. Well, the eyebrows go down. And when the eyebrows go down, what else happens? Well, the eyebrows are going down, but the eyeball is still in the same spot, right? So what's going to happen is some of this is going to obscure some of the eye... Sorry, I meant this part. Some of this eyebrow is probably going to obscure some parts, so you might get an expression that's more like this. The eyebrow is actually overlapping the eye, and then the eye gets a bit more squinty, and you have the pupils, and they're just touching the sides. If you want to make the person look very, I guess, hateful and angry, you could do this type of expression, where they just are not happy about anything. And if you want to make them like very, like, just enraged, you might open the eyes up and create, you know, this kind of thing. And again, you can shrink the iris just for effect. And it's the same as shocked. So this is enraged. Get rid of the eyebrows. Make this a bit rounder on the top. Still get the iris in here. And now it's shocked. Right? Very round, very... And then, you know, bring the eyebrow down. It's very confused. Huh? So, again, I don't want to go too much into detail about this because I've done a video where I've talked about, it's in one of the pointy chins, I think it's episode 2, it covers a lot of expressions, and you can see exactly how I go about doing expressions in real life. So now I'm going to deal with how to paint eyes. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to a hard round brush for the painting, but things are going to be pretty similar. And whenever I'm painting, the first thing I do is the drawing. So I'm going to get this shape of the head in. Now, I'm probably going to have to explain this a bunch of times, but this is drawing. Now, why is this drawing? Because a lot of people will think drawing is this, where you use lines, and painting is this, where there's no lines. No. Drawing, what drawing is getting correct proportion and placement. Proportion and placement. This is drawing. Also, it includes perspective. Perspective. All this is part of drawing. Anatomy too, part of drawing. And this doesn't disappear whether you use lines or whether you use shape. Doesn't matter. It's still about proportion, placement. Where is this on the page, right? That's drawing. Okay, so let's say first thing I'm going to do is get a shape for the head. And I could have done this a bunch of ways. One way I could have done it is to outline the head. But I'm not going to do that for this. I'm just going to deal with things in a much more painterly. And when you say painterly, you tend to mean without, lines, in a more organic, sort of silhouette-based manner. Although I still would classify that as drawing. But so while drawing is dealing with the proportion and the placement, to me painting is dealing with things like the values, the brushwork, the color, all that falls into more painting. So here we have a shape of a head, and I'm going to add a shadow under the neck so that you get more of where this head is. So see, we've got like a head now, okay? Now the next thing I'm going to do is put in the eyes. So this is the big thing that I think I see a lot of beginners make the mistake of when doing eyes, is they will only think in terms of lines, like here's where the eye goes. But we're going to do this, but we're going to do it the same way as we did it before. What's the first thing we did? Well, we found the eye sockets. Well, this is what we're going to do this time too. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put them in as tone instead of line. So here's where the eyes go, roughly. Now this is a shadow because the eye sockets are, the eyes are in sockets, right? So this is the first step. Now the next thing I tend to do is also the nose. I'll get like shadow, and this is if the light's coming from above. It could be coming from below. And it also depends on how far in your eyes are. So for instance, if you have, this is a side view of a person, and their eyes are really, close to the surface, and they don't have much of an eye socket, then, and this is more common with girls and children as well, then what's going to happen is this eye is not going to be in too much shadow. It's still going to be in shadow, but less shadow, something like that maybe. And what happens is you often get the iris darker, and so it's still, when you squint your eyes, this does look darker, but it's less dark than someone with more sunken in eyes, and the eyes would be further to the back of the head. Usually it's more sunken in, and then you get more of a shadow. But yeah, this is really important, is get the eye sockets in as a shadow shape. And then the rest is just, what we already learned, like how wide are the eyes? Well, you have one eye width in between, and then you get the eyes here. So again, this is drawing, this is placement. You tend to get darkness here, and then I put in the eyes, and you'll notice I'm not even putting in lights for the whites of the eyes, but it's starting to look like I'm putting a bit of tone underneath for the lower lid, and then I'm going to put a bit of a crease, and this is going to be more of a line, but I'm not thinking of it as a line. I'm still thinking of it as just tone, but that's the crease of the upper lid. Now something else that happens is sometimes you get a highlight on the upper lid, but it's not going to be as light as the rest of the face, right? It's not going to be as light as this part, because let's say this is, and I can just add some lines just to block in where this face is. So I don't want to paint the entire face, and so I'm just going to use the lines as a way of letting you know, like, yeah, here's where the eyes are. But otherwise, this is it. It doesn't have to go too much further than this. So you got it to this point. Now what happens often is you have the nose here, so you get a bit of shadow on either side of the bridge of the nose, and let's say the light, again, it's coming from above, so you'll get some shadow here. Now what that does is it almost creates, when you squint, it almost creates like just a band of shadow right there, right across the nose, or right across the face, and it's just blocked by this. And let's say this person was wearing a hat or something, you might get like a shadow shape that's like that, you know, and then the brim of the hat would be like that, coming down. So that's really important, is to remember that you start with the shadow, and what it's letting you know is that these aren't as dark as you might think they are. You know, the whites of the eyes aren't as dark. Now, it doesn't mean they're as dark as they currently are, but it does mean they're not as dark as, or I mean, as light. They're not as light as like this, right? This seems, now when I put this in, it must seem very like, whoa, what the heck? But this is how a lot of people will start eyes if they don't have the shadows in. If they don't start from this base, is they will go ahead and put the whites as very white, and it's too stark, it's too shocking. So the next thing you want to consider is that, well, okay, so the whites, the actual darkness of the whites of the eyes tends to be very close in value to, we added a shadow here, right? But you could just take the skin color outside, and this is for a person with light complexion, and use the skin tone for the whites of the eyes, and it tends to work pretty well. Or you could even go a bit darker, but that tends to be more the value of the light. Now it looks much lighter because remember, we put in the dark to begin with. Okay, now I'm going to sculpt out this more. I'm going to create a bit more light on the tops of this ridge. See we have here? Because what's happening is this is a fold, right? So it's creasing. You got this crease, and so it gets darker and it gets a bit lighter on here and here. So this is super exaggerated, but I'm going to draw in what parts the light hits. So it hits here, here, it would probably hit this whole part of the head, and then it hits in the eyes, and it hits on the lower lid, and it also hits here and here and here. So this is this tends to be where the lights hit, and you get it on the cheeks and other places. But knowing that, obviously we're not going to go that light, because skin is very, very subtle where the lights are. So usually what happens is I put down some tone, and then I just work with the tone I have. You'll notice, okay, here's pure black. That's pure black. So I still have a lot of dark I can add compared to what I currently have. I mean, look at this. It's dark. Let me open it here. It's dark, but it's not pure black. And pure white is right here. So, you know, we're not pure white. Our light is here. It's pretty much a mid-tone value, right? So we don't have any pure white and we don't have any pure black yet. So I'm going to put in some highlights. And so I'm going to take the color of the skin and just lighten it a bit. And I'm going to start by doing this entire thing in grayscale, and then we can add some color to that. And I'll tell you some tips about things in color. But okay, so I'm going to add a bit of lightness to these areas, and I probably went a bit overboard with the eye portion. So I'm going to knock that back a bit. Okay, so we have a bit of a highlight on the tip of this bridge of the nose. And then I'm going to add a bit of a highlight again on the tip of the nose itself. And this isn't how to draw noses, but let's just add that. And now I'm going to outline the lower lid just a bit with a bit of a lighter tone. And I'm doing this pretty light, so it's not as light as this part of the face right here, here. This is actually much lighter than this right here, but this looks lighter. So see, I'm going to look at the color picker. I'm going to pick this color, and it's right here, right? I'm going to pick this color for the lower lid, and see, it's darker. See? Darker than that. And yet it looks pretty light. So that's all about relationships. It's understanding that yes, it looks darker doesn't mean it is actually darker. Now, we're also going to put in some light here and here. And you usually get this, I'm not 100% sure why, but I do notice that you often get some light here, and it feels like the skin's also a bit of a different texture. And so let's get that in. I'm also going to get the eyelid going a bit around, so like so. and then it tends to get dark in the crease here, in the corner, here and here. So here we have some eyes, and that's looking pretty okay. Now we can get in some eyebrows. Now with eyebrows, I'm going to block it in with a bigger brush. What I don't want to do is go ahead and get this small brush and do these kind of scratchy lines. No. This is why painting is great, because we can just take a big brush and sort of block them in, keep them very soft. The eyebrows, any place with hair on a face tends to be pretty soft. And then I'm using some more tone to shape it. And I'm gonna go ahead and add a bit more tone of light on the forehead using some of this color or value, just so that looks more, you know, cohesive. And get a bit of dark for the top of the head. So we have this, and maybe some light on the cheeks. Okay, and if I want to smudge this, I can either go ahead and use a soft brush to do that, but my new favorite thing is just to take a soft smudge brush and just make that really nice and smooth. And there we go. So now we have the general structure of the eye. Now this is a darker eye, right? But at this point we can really change a lot. So I'm zoomed in a bit more now, and I'm going to do more of the structure of the eye. So, or I'm going to do the colors of the eye. So first of all, I'm going to take a bit of a darker tone, and I'm going to put in, remember we talked about how there's a shadow cast from the upper lid onto the eye? I'm going to get that shadow in, and it's going to cast over the white of the eye as well as the iris. Okay, so that's there. And I'm also going to darken some of this, because it got lost in the smudging process, some of this upper eyelid. Okay, and there's a bit of highlight here, so I'm going to keep that, put it a bit here. And there's this lower lid. You see the lower lid part, that's important. And let's get some of the tear duct in here. And now we can also darken with some softer tone where the eyelash is going to be. And now I'm also softening this iris. It's very important you soften this, because it actually isn't as hard as it looks. This right here, you don't want to go this hard. It's not that hard. Keep it softer. Keep it softer, like so. Okay. And it just it'll look so much more realistic. And okay, so now we can lighten these eyes or darken them. Let's say they're very dark eyes. Well, sure, we can go ahead and darken them. And it's not pure black that I'm using. I'm just darkening it. And there, now they're darker. Or we can do the opposite. We can lighten them up. Now, when I lighten them, I'm probably going to take a color that's very close to the skin color, but I'm going to leave the edge a bit darker. I'm not going to color it in super light. I don't want to go crazy white. Like this isn't like a Byakugan from Naruto. It's not like super white. In fact, this is already a bit too light. And to compare, this is white. This is what white would be, you know. So let's say you're doing blue eyes or some light gray eyes. Well, they're not going to be that dark, light, actually. They're still going to be a bit dark. But what's going to happen is it's going to contrast a lot with the pupil. Now with the pupil, we can go pretty dark. So I'm not going to go pure black just because it's nice to have stuff that's not pure black, but I'm just going to put in the pupil here. And see, now these eyes look a bit lighter. And what I can do is actually darken a bit above them, and these are looking like lighter eyes. Now what are we missing? Well, we're missing the highlights. So what we can do is use our whites now, and I'm also going to I'm going to make the pupil a bit softer, again, it just tends to look better. And I'm going to darken just this area and this area of the top of the iris. And maybe the eyelashes, make them a bit more defined. Now we can put in our highlight, and this time let's just go for maybe not pure white, but something pretty bright. And again, keep it very small. And let's get in the highlight. And now we can lighten the opposite side and also darken around the highlight. That's the first thing I'm going to do, is darken around the highlight just a bit, because these are pretty light eyes. And then I'm going to take the highlight color and very lightly go on the opposite side. And then just going to smudge some of that and just soften it a bit. And it's going to look like some nice light area. And at this close, you know, you can add a bunch of details and stuff like this stuff. And I'm just making it by doing this shape, going around the iris. You can add these type of details. And it does add something at this range, but let's say we're far off like this. You don't need to add that much. And here I can darken the eyebrows. And the way I'm gonna build some of these hairs is actually just take some of the skin tone and cut into them rather than drawing all the hairs. I will draw some of them, especially here it's a bit darker, so I'm gonna darken this area, but otherwise you don't need to draw everything. And here you have maybe some lashes. The other thing is, okay, we have our highlight. Well, the eyes tend to have moisture anyway, especially at the lower portions and the tear duct. So it's a good idea to also give some highlight to that area. And I mean, if you do too much, it's gonna look like they're crying. But if you do, you know, just a bit, it still looks fine. And keeping it soft. And I could just, now that I look at it, I would make the white of the eye a bit lighter, but not by much. So I'm just lightly touching this. Just adding a bit of white. And I'm also just adding it here. Like I added a bit of white here, right near the iris, but not here. Because this is, again, it's a ball, right? So what happens with a ball is, let's say this is our ball. Well, if we have a light portion, it's gonna be light, and then it's gonna soften as you go around, right? You'd get a highlight, so that's kind of what happens with this as well. So we get that, and then I tend to darken here, and the reason I'm darkening this part of the eyebrow is because this is the eye socket, right? So in the eye socket it gets darker, but on the edge it starts to be at the same plane as this area. So it takes on that value, see? So you see what happens? This is starting to look like this is one form that goes around like this. So if I drew a line and it's going to go over this form, let's say it starts here, I'm going to go down this form, and then a bit over this, and then down here, and then go down here, that, come up here, go around here, and down like that. So it's not just a straight line like that, right? You want to be thinking of these forms, like going across, going like that, that's round, comes up, goes down here, comes up, around like this, down, and comes down like that. So you always want to be able to think of these contours, and it's not easy and it takes a while to do it, but this is all part of drawing. So this is why I always say to people, if you want to learn how to paint, draw first, because this is super important. This is what you need to understand, and you get this from doing tons of drawing, from drawing in perspective, from understanding forms, maybe from doing 3D work you can get this as well. So That's something. And I shouldn't do this, but I'm just darkening a bit of the nose just because it looks a bit strange having no nose and no mouth. So whatever, I put that in. But anyway, this is what I would do for painting. Now I'm going to talk real quick about just some basic colors and some coloring techniques. So let's say I was going to color this. Well, first thing, an easy way to do things is to just put down a base tone. So let's say this person's Caucasian. I'm gonna just take this color, fill the entire thing, set this mode to color. Now we have this, and I'm gonna adjust it with Control U, because it's easy to put down a tone in digital and then adjust it to whatever you want. So I'm gonna find a color that's sort of similar to like a burnt sienna in oil painting. And now what I can do with the rest is, okay, I take this color that's already there, and then I can just adjust it slightly. So cool it down for the whites of the eyes. And also getting in the iris. I just cooled it down. I can put that in for the eyebrows as well. And then I'm just going to use a switch to a soft brush. And I'm going to warm it up and take it to a pink for the corners of the eyes and the lower lid, and I'm gonna cool it down more for the white of the eyes. Now the white of the eyes, when I draw in an anime-ish style or any kind of cartoon style, I tend to make them a blue, like a very light blue, but not white. So something around here, like something around here, very light blue. And that's because healthy eyes tend to have a slight bluish tint to them, and it always looks fine if you do this. And then for the teeth, I tend to make them a slightly off-white yellow color. Even something like this, it only looks really dull when you look at it in this small window. But when you draw it on and put it in an actual face, it tends to look fine when it's around lips. You don't want to go pure white for the eyes. You don't want to go pure white for the teeth. Now for the eye color itself, let's just make it sort of a greenish gray color. And you'll notice it's fairly desaturated, and it still looks quite bright, quite brilliant. I can just use black if I want to desaturate anything. But yeah, I wouldn't do this thing. I wouldn't go like this, because this is what often I see, is like really saturated colors. I'm like, oh, it's blue eyes. No, blue eyes tend to be almost like a gray, something like this. And you'll see, okay, this looks fairly convincing as blue eyes. In fact, they're pretty bright blue eyes. And yet, like I'd probably go even less saturated, something like that. And yet when we look at it, it's even reading as a red, but it's a gray. So that's that. Okay, so that's the first stage, is the color base. So let's say this is the base we've got. The next thing I do, and this was all done on a color layer. Next thing I do is I make a new layer. And here's where actually good stuff happens, when you're on a new layer and it's not a color layer, and now you can actually start blocking in some things with just pure color. So I'm blocking in some darker pupils, and what I can do is take some of this and just go, I tend to go to the pure colors after, like a bit more highlight on that. I can go into here in this desaturated and maybe lighten it just a touch for some highlight, but it's still like a gray. I can take some of this white of the eye color and shift it to more of a blue. And when I say shift it to more of a blue and cool it down and stuff, you'll notice it's still the same color. It's still like this orangish color. I just desaturated it, and that makes it look more blue. Same thing here. I could add some highlights and add a bit of a darker area in the tear duct. Just lower the value. and warm it up a bit. Not that much. And get some darker shapes in here. So yeah, this is how I would go about doing that. And then something else that's a good, I suppose it's a trick, but I like to put, I take a blue and I put a blue, a bit lighter, and a blue rim just on the edge of the iris as it touches the eye. And it tends to just, I don't know, I think this happens in real life anyway. Tends to look good. And I also will sometimes put a bit of light around the pupil as well, and a bit of dark, just varying it, adding stuff in it basically, just adding flecks of stuff. And yeah, there we have some lighter eyes. I think the whites of the eyes are too big, and also something's bothering me, so I'm gonna flip it. Flip, and see what it is that is bothering me. Oh, that's what it was. The whole thing is tilted. So just merge these, and then take this and tilt it. Whatever. That's fine. And yeah, so from here, this nose is also very off-center. If I draw a center line straight up and down, you can see how off-center this is. You can get that nose a bit more correct. But yeah, so you get this, and then you can go ahead and add a bunch more subtle changes. So just different color variations. You can cool down the forehead, warm up the cheek area, but I do this all sort of after. Alright, so what else can we do? Well, probably just give him more of a 5 o'clock shadow. The way I'm going to do that is just desaturate the color, and then I can add some here and darken it a bit. And see, this looks kind of like skin, but kind of not. And the reason is because of the surrounding colors are they're very similar, right? It's all similar. So let's say I just took this guy's head and I'm using a lasso, and I'm just going to lasso around the edge. And I'm just going to switch the color to maybe like a dark bluish color. And it's going to make the skin look a lot more like skin. And this is why color is so important, because it brings out the blue in his eyes as well. See, and now the blue looks much more blue, whereas before it was still a bit strange. But just changing the surrounding color is going to make a big difference. And, you know, let's say we gave him hair. But just on one side of his face, because he's cool like that. You know, makes it a bit more. Looks a bit more normal. So anyway, I guess this is pretty much all I have for these eyes. And I mean, the most important thing are just things like the whites of the eyes. That's the biggest issue that I keep seeing. It's the whites of the eyes are not white when you paint them. And even when I do cell shaded stuff that's more anime, like, I don't make them that white. So there's that. And then the other thing is to keep the eye in shadow. Now the eyelid, the lower lid, might get a bit of light as well, because again, this is a round shape, right? So you got that, and then And then the other thing is just all those basic things of, you know, eyes have different shapes. Just practice and look at reference. It's really not that hard, and things like how the pupil is situated gets pretty big when it's dilated. Usually not that big, but you know, maybe this person is doing some recreational activities, and so their pupil is very dilated. So yeah, I guess that's it, and I hope that helped, and thanks for watching.